I would like to introduce again today's speaker. Again, it is Laura Coyle, and she's going to be presenting tablet techniques for Adobe Illustrator. You know, working with a tablet for many of you is one of the best ways to leave your mark in Adobe Illustrator. And in this webinar, we're very pleased to have freelance illustrator and instructor Laura Coyle. And again, she's going to be demonstrating some of her favorite ways of working in Adobe Illustrator with her tablet. Laura's been illustrating for clients like Target, Amazon, Hallmark for, well, quite a long time, almost 20 years now. And as she's also been teaching Illustrator for a few years as well with ReneePearson.com. If you haven't had the pleasure of seeing any of the webinars or tutorials over at Renee Pearson's website, I invite you to do so as well. So again, please join me in welcoming Laura, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen over to her and let her get started.
Thank you, Wes.
You are so very welcome. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter, Laura.
Okay.
There you go. It should be coming over right about
Okay.
now.
All right. Show my screen. There we go. So can you see me, or my screen at least?
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I have it's really nice to be here talking with you guys, and I have a few slides I just wanted to show at the beginning just to show you a little bit about the work that I do and sort of relate it to the demonstrations that I'm going to be doing in this hour. So this slide here is, and like you said, I've been illustrating for clients now for about 18 or so years, and this is one of several styles that I've worked in. That's a big thing with illustrators, always sort of trying to change styles and make styles that seem to work for the particular clients that we're going after. And this is a style that I've worked in for many years, and it's kind of a hybrid digital and traditional media. So all of the line work in here is all done by hand with pen and ink on paper and scanned in and then live traced, and then inside Illustrator, now it's called Image Trace in CS6. And then all of the shapes in the background, all the areas of color are created with the pen tool in Illustrator. So this is really how I had been working for a number of years. And this is that the previous slide was an advertisement for a shopping mall. This is a part of a story that was in Better Homes and Gardens. And this is another, this one was actually another editorial piece for Delta, their in-flight magazine. It was an article about ice skating rinks in the different cities that they fly to. And this has a lot of that sort of hybrid character about it too. All the line work is done by hand, and then all of the shapes and flat colors are all Illustrator shapes. And even working with pen and ink with live trace in Illustrator is really versatile because, you know, as you can see in some of these areas, and I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but you know, where this coat meets these pants on this figure here, you can see I leave gaps in the line work that I create on paper just to give myself more editing options so that if I want to move these around, I can move them around. If I need to shrink them, I can shrink them, and not everything is sort of, I'm not creating this big web of lines that I can't really crack into and edit. And that's one of the things you know, since I started working digitally, one of the things I love the best about it is the editability that you get in Illustrator. This is a page from a Magalog, which is an advertisement actually that was in Brides magazine. So this is advertising Target's Club Wed, and I did a bunch of backgrounds for them, and they put in all of the photography. This is the Parcheesi board game. I did the board and the box. This was such a fun project to work on. And you can see a lot of very illustratory shapes in here, but then a lot of details also, just to add sort of texture and a hand-done touch. Now, I also do a lot of maps too. This is a map that I did for another in-flight magazine. So this is a style that I've worked in probably up until about 3 or so years ago, and then I sort of started changing, going in a slightly different direction. And this is a little bit more indicative of that. So really all of that pen and ink on paper that I used to use is really very minimal. I mean, there's just a couple of details like in the face here and in the mother's face. Um, but the rest of it is all pen tool and pencil tool. And this is a really obvious example, this line here that goes to the iPod. All of these little curvy lines in here are all pen tool lines. And a lot that's going on in the lettering. This is actually a piece for Parenting magazine. It was called an article called "Sexy Too Soon," and it's about the dilemma that parents face with all of the images that are coming by their kids through through video games and music, a little on the subject of sex that they parents have to deal with protecting their kids from that or whatever. So this is the lyrics to Lady Gaga song here. Poker Face, that's it. um, so yeah, I'm kind of getting into more streamlined look and still trying to add hand done touches, but really they're done by hand, but they're all done with Illustrator tools, and usually with the pencil tool or the paintbrush or the blob brush. So these are tools that I've been exploring a lot more recently in my work. And this piece is from the same series. And I used to do a lot of brush work. So this lettering here is actually ink and a brush on paper. And so as I've been working, I really sort of wanted to try and experiment with these Illustrator tools to add some more of that kind of touch to my work. And so this was one piece where I sort of started doing that. It was like I was drawing, and these black lines here are still real world ink, but the all the line work, this pattern that's inside the little pig here, is done with the paintbrush in Illustrator. And actually it started out as something I was really just trying to comp this up, sketch this little figure up and not sort of break and go over to my drafting table and pick up the ink and get into all of that. I just wanted to sort of sketch something out quickly in the program. And so this is where I kind of started getting interested in trying to figure out how to use these brushes in Illustrator, and I'm talking here really mostly about the calligraphic brushes, the calligraphic brush tips. There's a lot of different brush types in Illustrator, and I'll talk about that some in this demonstration too. So this sort of got me on my way. This little collection of art that I was working on got me inspired to start taking apart how the calligraphic brushes work in Illustrator. So that led me to create a class, and this class is called Ink and Paint. It's actually a short hour and a half workshop. And one thing that I've been teaching now for a couple of years, and one of the, I mean, there are many things I really enjoy about it, but one of the great things is that, in the past I used to sort of try and pick up a new tool and get what I needed out of it as quickly as I could because I had a deadline and I had to rush. And then, when I started teaching, I could slow down and really crack it open and look at it really carefully, because I knew I was responsible for teaching some of these things to other people, and so I was going to take my time with it and be a little bit more methodical about it. And so the process of creating this class has taught me a lot about working with these brushes, and so I'm adding this more and more to my work now. So in the class, and I'm just going to show a couple slides from this class, and then I'm going to jump into demonstrating so you can actually see what I'm talking about really with these brushes. But this is just a screenshot from the class. And what I'm doing here is basically taking students through all the steps, how the brushes work, how these tools work, the paintbrush and the blob brush, and then through the steps of making all of these brushes here. And then we work on a project where you actually get to use them, and here's the finished product here. So, and ultimately this winds up in a repeat pattern, this motif here. But really, I think spending some time, having a framework to spend some time working with Illustrator and the brushes is really helpful, even if this isn't the kind of art that you want to create, because they are tools that are they're not always the most intuitive. I have to say that about Illustrator. I know that it intimidates some people, and but I find, the more people I experience, introducing to these tools, the more people I find that really love this program as much as I do, and I find it just makes a lot of sense once you get sort of underneath that initial layer. But these tools, there is a little bit that it takes to get up and running with them. Probably, certainly more so than it would be with just a regular brush and a pot of ink. But the upside is that every one of these lines here has that vector path running through it, has the anchor points and that little spine running through it, so you can adjust the handles and push and pull things. And so that's a great advantage over working in brush and ink on paper. And I certainly still do that, but I kind of pick and choose for what situation I need the most editability for, and that sort of thing. So it's a nice tool to have in your set of tools. And I think that this is really something that Illustrator definitely does better than Photoshop, and I'm not really experienced in Painter, so I'm not sure about that. But just being able to edit your lines like this, I don't think you can do this quite like you can in Illustrator anywhere else. So, and then this is just, I found this slide when I was putting these slides together because I had this presentation. This is on the left, it's a picture of me in my apartment in New York, and I always have to marvel at that, this terrible Venetian blind here. It's really living over Second Avenue in New York. It's a little dirty there. It's a lot of exhaust. But this is where I worked all the time, and I have all of my regular traditional tools, and then outside of the frame of this picture there's a computer. And so I sort of started early on trying to bring these two things together. And here on the right, this is like a promotion that I did for Valentine's Day. So I gave this away to art directors, and I had some chocolates, a little box of candy attached to it. But this is the way I always worked with a brush and ink on paper. So it's been sort of fun trying to figure out how I can get as much as I'm used to from working with traditional materials out of this Illustrator calligraphic brushes. And then this is just a picture of where I am now. Actually, this was from a few years ago, so the computer's different, but the mess is still here. Unfortunately, I kind of like to pile up stuff on my desk, but the reason I include this picture is because I've got this wonderful keyboard tray down here, and it's actually, unfortunately, in the picture you can't see it. The Wacom tablet is over to the right of the keyboard, but I find this to be like a really ergonomically, it's nice and easy having this adjustable keyboard tray that's sort of hovering right over my lap. And sometimes I actually put the tablet on my lap, and then other times I have it resting on here, and I take this little padding off here so it's not really interrupting my wrist. But that was a big part of why I switched to a tablet in the first place is just because it's a lot easier on my hands and I spend a lot of time at the computer. So that's kind of my setup. And so let me go ahead and I'll close this down and we'll go into Illustrator and I'll show you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the paintbrush and the blob brush. So here's the paintbrush tool. So let me see, I'm going to move, is there any, hopefully everything's going okay. I'm just going to shut this little screen down so I can see the rest of my tools here. Okay. So when you're using the paintbrush, there are different types of brushes in Illustrator. Right now I'm just focusing on the calligraphic brush because the calligraphic brush is just the most easy to adjust and to make it really your own brush, sort of as I've been talking about ink brushes would be. And so let's see. One way to work with this brush is to start by, well, let's see, which one do I have here? I have a 7-point angle brush. I should say when you start with the paintbrush and you choose a brush from your palette here, a lot of the time by default you're going to see a thumbnail view and this has all the different types of Illustrator brushes in it, but I like to, when I'm working with calligraphic brushes, like to use a list view because I name everything with the point size and the angle, and so that helps me sort of identify them easier when they're in my palette here or in my panel here. So so I've chosen the brush, the paintbrush tool, and I've chosen the 7-point angle brush. And then up here in my color panel, I have a stroke color because brushes take their color from the stroke color. So if you had nothing in your stroke color, if you had none there and you had a solid color in the fill, it would just jump into the stroke color. But if you have any stroke color here, that's what the brush is going to work with. And then the other thing, there's a bunch of settings inside the brush, and I'll show you that. But I wanted to show you the settings that come along just with the tool itself. So the tool is one thing, and the brush tip that you add to it is another thing. So these are the most important right here, fidelity and smoothness. So you actually get to choose depending on what kind of art you're working on, or maybe if your hand's a little shaky, you can adjust for that. So fidelity, of course, is how faithful is this line, the resulting line, going to be to the mark that I'm making on my tablet. So this is not terribly faithful, and I never crank it up this high. I'm always in this area down here. But if I bring it all the way down to the bottom, half a pixel is as faithful as you can get. And then the smoothness, I'm usually sort of around in this area here or lower. So I don't ever really crank these up this high. But if I have it all the way down at the end here, then when I draw, you can see I'm getting a lot of anchor points along this line. And the thing that's, of course, that I was saying was so wonderful about working with a paintbrush is that, you can go in and pull these anchor points. Oops, I got a line there. Pull these anchor points and these curve handles. But if you're starting out with a line that has a ton of anchor points in it and what you're going for is something really smooth, then that's not going to be ideal. So it depends on what you're working on. If I'm working on lettering and I want something to be really accurate, of course I'm going to have these numbers pretty low. But, generally 2 and somewhere around 15 works better. And so let's see if I get fewer anchor points. So I'm getting fewer anchor points now. Let me try not to go so slow. Maybe if I go a little faster. Let me crank up the smoothness a little bit here. So now we're getting fewer anchor points. So that's the tool side of things. And then also there's other options here. I generally, with the paintbrush, I like to keep selected just so that I can draw and delete. So if this is selected, I can just hit the delete key and keep going and delete if I don't like it and just go again. There are other fill new brush strokes. I don't use that very much. I explain it in my class, but it's not something I use much. Edit selected paths. That if you keep that clicked, which there are occasions when I do, but not always, it allows you to keep adding on to a line. But the problem is that you can also wind up losing part of your line, like I just did there. So as a general rule, I leave that unchecked. And then over here, the brush tip, the calligraphic brush tip. So if I double click on the brush tip, I can make adjustments here. And so this is a 7-point angle. Maybe I want to make it a little bit thicker. Maybe we can see it a little bit better. Now it's 12 points. So I'm going to go ahead and, while I'm at it here, make it different so I don't get confused. And so here is the setting that is the most important for working with the tablet, pressure. And I find that the first thing I want to do is adjust the size of the brush based on the pressure. That's what feels the most natural. And so when you choose these options down here, fixed is the default. That takes nothing from the tablet other than just the movement that you're making. But when you choose pressure, then you have this option variation opened up to you. And so you have up to, like this brush here is 12 points, so I have up to 12 points of variation. So that's the maximum variation. So what that means is that you can see it right here in this little preview window. There's no little print from the pen tip here. Here's one that's medium size and here's one that's larger. So this is the size variation sort of just expressed here for you so you can see it. With the very lightest pressure, I have a disappearing stroke. And then with even pressure or just regular pressure, I have this middle, which is 12 points. So that's the size of the brush. And then here I have 24 points. So this is the variation if I press really, really hard. It's hard to press hard enough to make that happen, but at least when you work with a wide difference like that, then you can really see it in your strokes. And then a lot of the times I leave these things just as they are. Now I actually have an art pen, which is like an accessory that you can get to add to your tablet. And I will use it sometimes because it allows you to use rotation. So if you could picture like a chisel point pen, something that you would do calligraphy with, and you can sort of spin it around in your fingers and change the width of the brushstroke that you get. That's what you would do with an art pen. But rotation it really doesn't come along with an Intuos or a bamboo, so I usually leave this at fixed, and then the angle, I sort of decide that based on the work that I'm doing, and that's something I demonstrate in the class because that goes into a little bit more detail. But anyway, so now we have this pressure variation here, and so I can press really hard and really light and make a nice varying line there. And then I hold down the Option or Alt key, and that brings up the Smooth tool, which is right under the brush. Actually, right under the pencil, I should say. But the Smooth tool, actually, you can just, oops, I picked up the pencil there. Let me undo. Back to my brush, holding down Option or Alt. I can just go over this, and it removes anchor points. So it allows you to manually sort of push and pull and smooth these lines out, and then you wind up with a line that you really can edit if you need to beyond this, with the white arrow, the direct selection tool, which is how you get at these little anchor points here. So that's the paintbrush. And I wanted to show you, I'm looking to make sure I didn't miss anything I wanted to say. Okay, so I want to show you the blob brush too. And then I'll just show you some applications for this in actual work. Well, here's a paintbrush line. I want to have that out. Okay, now here's a blob brush line, and I'm using the same brush tip. So this is something that I talk about in class. Now, in the blob brush options, you can see here you have the same options that you can adjust, just like you can in the calligraphic brush tips. So you can just on the fly sort of or create blob brush tools, or I mean, I should say you can make adjustments to the tool to have it do everything that you would have from a calligraphic brush tip. But what I'm teaching in this class is a way to make calligraphic brushes that you can use with the blob brush tool, so you don't have to always go here and make these adjustments here. Um, and they're exactly the same. They're in a different order for some unknown reason. But anyway, and then we have keep selected, which I showed you before. That works the same for the blob brush. This one is a little different, and I might show you that if we have time for that, but it's not as useful. But here is fidelity and smoothness. So I can raise this up a little bit. And I just like this, to me is just one of the coolest features of making line work in Illustrator. You can't do this in Photoshop, so it's really nice to be able to do that. The difference between these two tools, as you can see in outline mode, is that that's the paintbrush, so it's a single path, and the blob brush, it looks the same, but it's expanded. It's an expanded brush stroke. So if I click on this and select it, you can see tons of anchor points there. So it's perfect for some applications and not so perfect for others. I mean, obviously, if I want to go in and start editing the line, I'm going to be much happier with a paintbrush line for this task than I would be with this. There's just no way that this is going to be the right approach. And oh, by the way, you're seeing tons of anchor points here and all these little handles because I have a preference setting for that. Let me just show you that really quickly, just in case anybody's interested. A lot of times I do this when I'm working with the pen tool and editing anchor points in the handles. Sometimes it's nice to be able to see them all. So let's see, where is it? Selection, anchor display. And then show handles, this box right down here is checked. Show handles when multiple anchors are selected. So that, and I'll also, I didn't do this today, but I'll make the handles bigger so we can see them a little better. But it's nice sometimes to see a lot of handles, because in any case like this, it doesn't really matter. But in something more smooth like this, it's nice to see like the direction that these handles are taking. The more you understand that, the easier it is to make flowing lines, and that's a big part of working with vectors. So I like having that checked from time to time. Okay, so that's the basic difference between the blob brush and the paintbrush. And so the way I like to use them is like, okay, let's do a little paintbrush here. So I'm going to make a black stroke, and I guess I'll go back to that. There's that 12-point angle, and now I've got the paintbrush. So if I want to draw a leaf, and let me go ahead and change this color here so maybe we can see it when we have it selected. Okay, and I can always hit Option or Alt and smooth this line out. Okay, and so I have my leaf on layer 1. This is all done with the paintbrush, and then I'll go to layer 2 and I'll get the blob brush, and let me deselect because I don't want to have this selected when I if I change colors or tools because that'll just mess up that leaf that I just drew. Let's see. So I'm going to go get a swatch here and choose green, and it's in the stroke color um, because that is what the paintbrush and the blob brush, that's where they get their color from, that when you designate the stroke color. I'll go back to my brushes panel and let me pick, let's see, 15 points. Let's see how that'll work. And I can just delete if I don't like what I did. I do that a lot. But I have smoothing on here, so chances are I'm going to make a nice line. And then I can switch to my arrow tool and just get rid of this inner shape here. But I use the blob brush a lot for coloring like this on a separate layer because it's you know, it's the right tool for that particular piece of the artwork. Let's see. Okay, so, oh, and I should mention another thing about the blob brush, just a real basic thing about the blob brush. So if you're working in this color here and I do an overlapping stroke here, if I switch to outline mode, Command or Control Y, then I see that I've made the shape bigger. So strokes that are the same color merge with the blob brush. So that's another reason it makes it a perfect coloring tool because you can just sort of keep adding on to it there. And actually, I use this for making shapes. I make a lot of shapes with the pen tool, but I make a lot of shapes when I want something more organic with the blob brush. And in this case, this is like a fixed, I made this brush to be fixed. So it's not using pressure sensitivity just because I really did want to be able to make sort of these really simple shapes with this brush. But, you know, here's a brush with pressure sensitivity. So I can go heavy to light, and this is a shape. So it's really cool to be able to do this because, you know, if you know how to edit things in Illustrator, you can see that this could be useful working in, depending on the art that you're working in. So anyway, hey, so how, are things going okay so far? Is there a question I can answer?
Actually, Laura, I was just going to break in right at this very moment.
Okay,
So I made a note to ask you a question, and all of a sudden the chat board just started lighting up. So there's two big questions that a bunch of people have been asking.
okay.
One, can you use the smooth tool over a stroke that you've created with the blob brush?
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's you know, it depends on whether it's ideal or not. So, okay, this looks intimidating because, like I said, I have that setting on where you can see every handle and every point. So it looks a little less when I select one or two of them. But yeah, if I select this and I go and get the smooth tool, um, I can do this and smooth it out and make it a less complicated shave. And that makes it more editable for certain purposes. So it all depends on, you know, if you need it to be really accurate, maybe the smooth tool isn't going to work for you on this particular shape. It all depends on what you drew. But yeah, absolutely, you can use the smooth tool on a blob brush path. It's for a line, you know, if you want to smooth this line out that you just made with the blob brush, that is not going to work as well because you're only smoothing, you know, one side of it. So you're kind of changing the stroke there. I mean, and it works actually. So, you know, maybe in a certain situation that could work really well.
Yeah, perfect. And I think that I think you just answered the other big pressing question with when you were showing the blob brush there. How did you fill the leaf so quickly? I think you used the blob brush and then selected the inner circle as they merged together. Is that right?
Exactly. Yes, yes. And that's a shortcut I do a lot with the blob brush when I'm coloring is, you know, really why bother filling this in when you can just switch to the white arrow and delete. So, yeah.
Perfect. Very exciting.
Yeah. So anyway, so is that Are we good on questions now?
Yep, go right ahead.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, so this is like just, and I want to show you some more of applications for work. So I'm just going to quickly show you. This is the artwork that you saw earlier in the screenshot for this class, Ink and Paint, and so let's see. If I let me I'm going to turn off the sketch. So you can see a variety of strokes here. So the ones that are just a little line, these are paintbrush strokes. This is a paintbrush stroke. This shape here, this flower shape, is a blob brush shape. So this little piece here is a combination of both of those tools, kind of using them for, I think, what they do best. And the file itself is broken up into layers, so then you can control that merging behavior that happens with the blob brush when you're painting in the same color. You can also, dividing your work up on the layers, of course, allows you to, select or target something here in the layers panel and then just dial back the opacity so that you can see underneath it. So if I'm looking at the sketch here, I can still see the sketch underneath when I work with the opacity. And then now I've made it opaque again. And the sketch is a big part of working with paintbrushes, the paintbrush and the blob brush in Illustrator. I really think, like, I find it helps me a lot because what you're doing is you are doing some things that mimic natural materials. I mean, you are working with pressure sensitivity and trying to get a nice flowing thick and thin. So let me see if I can just illustrate that a little bit here. I'll create a new layer. Let's see. So yeah, you're mimicking materials, real materials, in some ways, and in other ways you're doing something that is a little difficult, which is, um, I'm working on an Intuos tablet here, and I'm looking at the screen, and I'm not looking at my hand. And of course, if you were working with a brush on paper, you would be looking at your hand. You would see which direction the brush is going in and all that. So, this takes a little time and practice. So that's kind of part of what I'm doing here by giving you something to trace. And also, just for my own work, I find if I draw it out in pencil first, um, there's a lot of things that I can focus on that are taken care of for me. So I kind of like working especially with these tools with an under something to trace here. And the way I'm doing this is it's on a locked layer underneath here, and I think what I did was, after I scan this in, if I unlock it, I can see if I select it. I don't know if it has an opacity setting or, oh, I see. The layer here is in italics, so you know that when you double click on it, um, it's dim images too, and then 30%. So there's more than one way to do this. You can make your image, give it an opacity setting just on its own. You can actually transform the whole layer by double clicking on the layer and getting into its options and choosing to dim images to whatever percentage works for you. Maybe I'll make this a little bit darker so we can see it a little bit better. But anyway, yeah, that's just to say that working on a pencil sketch is a nice way to sort of uh, get straight to working with the tools. And another sort of difference, between this and real brush and ink is that, in Illustrator there isn't a brush preview. So like I'm not seeing anything that's telling me about the tip here that I'm working with. So over here in my brushes panel, I'm working on a right angle brush. So, imagine a chisel point brush in your hand, and I call it the right angle because it's going up and to the right. So that means that if I go in this direction, I'm going to have a thinner stroke. And then if I go in this direction, I'm going to have a thicker stroke. And then of course the amount of pressure that you use adds to that effect. But just with even pressure, this line is changing just by virtue of the fact that it has an angle. And there it is right there. So it's great if I want to start really thin here and get thicker. Doing a leaf in this direction, I get what I want. But if I'm going to go in the opposite direction, it's a little harder to make a finer point on it. So I'll work with a left angle brush. And then I can really, if I need a really fine, I'm going to get it better going in this direction. So those are some of the things I sort of dive into a little bit more deeply in this class. And then a lot of these solid shapes are created using the blob brush. So it's kind of a nice combination of working with those two tools. So again, I'm just sort of looking at a job that I did, which is sort of, well, it's all about lettering. And this is another place that I would use the paintbrush, the blob brush, and the pencil tool a lot. And of course, I have this really sort of sketchy sketch here, but even that is really helpful for, getting your ideas down and working over top of it. It's better than working with just the blank canvas. So anyway, here's one of the examples, and I've expanded all of this already so you can't see the lines inside. And I was playing around with this chisel shaped brush. Let me see. So this is a 6-point flat brush. And so if you look at the word October in outline mode, you can see it's all just paintbrush paths. But when you figure out what brush you want to use, if you want to do something that has a calligraphic look, I'm a little shaky. I'm gonna go ahead and make this a little bit smoother, a little bit less faithful to my shaky hand. Still not so smooth, so I'll get the smooth tool and smooth that out. A lot of times what I do too is, like, if the end is looking a little weird, because it always happens, when you're trying to make a swoopy stroke and some little thing happens at the end, I'll just hit C for cut and cut next to a point here, and then I have this nice clean point that I can kind of pull out, and I have a simple curve there, so that's why I like to do that. So it just makes the editing a little bit easier, so I do that a lot too. But yeah, I mean, lettering like this right here is a combination of, the pen tool. Let me switch to just a regular old fill there. A pen tool square like this R here, and maybe the pencil tool. Let's see. I'll make sure I don't have, sometimes you have to click basic when you're using the pencil tool, because even though the pencil tool is all about drawing these uniform paths, if you have a brush selected, you will actually be able to use it with the pencil tool. Let's see if I had there it is. So to sort of clear that out, I'll click the basic, and then I can take that line, and this is what I love about Illustrator. I can decide just how thick I want it. If I had to go back in and smooth that, I could. I go here and just do that. Decide if I want to make it thicker or cut the end off with the scissors. It's just like, oh my gosh, this would take me so much longer in ink on paper. And then the other thing is, not even just going in and getting the points and those kind of things. You can just squeeze things. I do a lot of edits just by small, adjustments in the with the bounding box handles. So yeah, for lettering, it's great to sort of build art this way using whatever tool you need. I mean, right here you could color this shape in really easily with the blob brush. So that's that. Let me move on to another example here, just so I can show you, like for sketching. So I've got pencil sketches here. In fact, here's the image from the slideshow earlier. And let's see what, if I can, I need to, okay, yeah, I have that layer locked. So the sketch is locked. But this right here is a blob brush path. So if I want to do a shadow in this gray color, I'll just do something. It's really fast to do something very organic, quick, markery looking like this with the blob brush. And oh, I need to get rid of where her foot is. So if I get the eraser tool, that's Shift E. The eraser tool is kind of just made for the blob brush. So, and I'm using the bracket keys, the left and right bracket keys, so I'm making it smaller or larger. You're familiar with that if you work in Photoshop. Um, so I can edit that. But this is one way that I use to sort of add some tonality to my sketches is the blob brush. And on the, you can use it with any of these calligraphic brush tips, and that's why I teach that in this class, because it's a nice shortcut to having to go and do this every time. But for a lot of coloring applications, it's okay with me for it to just be this sort of blunt, you know, circle. But, and because it's still pressure sensitive, it's just you may want a different angle or that sort of thing. Okay, so that's how I use it to work on a sketch. And actually I have another one here. This is like a color comp. It's the same thing. This was all done. This is a pencil sketch. I'll turn it off so you can see it. So the pencil sketch came first. Just scanned that and placed it in Illustrator. And then the blob brush, with transparency, it makes for some really nice washy shapes that you can layer over here. And unlike, working with markers, you can change everything, delete stuff that you don't like and all of that. So all of this, which has a nice, sort of natural marker feel. So if you need to do something like this that's sketchy for a client, I found the blob brush is like the perfect tool for that. Saves me a lot of time too because it's faster. Okay, and then I've just got one more example here that I wanted to show you, and this is like this is an illustration that's really a lot of pen tool paths because this is really what I do the best, and this is what I'm really the most comfortable with in Illustrator is the pen tool. But another shortcut I found is like for making shadows. So this shadow here is a separate shape. This shadow here is a separate shape. And in order for them to sort of look integrated with the shape behind them, they have to have the same curve. You have to have these two pieces. You pretty much want to borrow this path right here at the bottom of the shirt, and so that they register up perfectly. So I would take a shape like this and copy it off to the side, and I'm just nudging it with my arrow key. And then I'll get the blob brush, and let's see, here's a color. I'm going to make it multiply, and let's see if that works. Yeah, okay. So it's multiply 50%. So it's the same color as the shirt, but it's not merging with this shape because it has a different blending mode on it. Now I'm going to go and put that back. Multiply 50%. Okay, and there's the blob brush. So if I really want kind of an organic edge to this shape here, to this shadow, then I can do that. I've got my two distinct shapes here, and I'm going to use the Shape Builder tool, which came about in CS5. I just love this tool. I use it all the time. And the shortcut is Shift M. And it works like a Pathfinder if you haven't used it before. So if I just click once, then it's kind of performing like a Pathfinder divide. So I can get rid of all these other shapes, and now I have my shadow shape. So let me move this guy out of the way. So yeah, now I've got a shadow. I can put this over the top, and that was much faster than had I cut the original shape and tried to finish the ends off with a pen tool. So I'm a huge pen tool fan, but I use the Blob Brush a lot for stuff like that. So, are there any more questions? Because I know we're getting towards the end, and I'm just going on and on here.
Wow, Laura, we've got a ton of questions and
Okay, okay.
fantastic questions too. In fact, I have to gather my thoughts. There's so many questions,
Oh my
and really,
gosh.
really good questions. So, let me just kind of go through a couple of these things here. Um, so one of the questions had come in, and then you had actually talked about it a little bit earlier, where you come up with a lot of your sketches, using traditional pencil and paper and so on, and then scan and work over and stuff like that. But one of the questions was, have you always used a pen and tablet for tools and never a mouse? I mean, is it all about the pen with you?
Yes. In fact, I stopped using the mouse, and I could draw anything with the mouse and the pen tool. But years ago, I stopped using the mouse because it was so bad for my hand that every single point you do a click, and I mean that is just way too much stress on your hand. And so I had a repetitive strain injury, and that's what got me to use the tablet in the first place. But then the more I started using the natural tools, then there's no substitute because you have the pressure sensitivity. So yeah, so that's how I do it.
Gotcha. Excellent. And kind of along the same lines of that, you mentioned a lot of times you're in a hurry to make deadlines and such. And I think any of us that work any kind of freelance work can appreciate the deadlines. But do you ever go straight to the computer, just totally bypass the paper? Do you use clip art? Do you maintain libraries of assets?
Well, okay, I have libraries of assets, things like textures, colors for sure, because all of the colors that I use, mo for the most part, I work in CMYK because I do a lot of print stuff. So once I know a color works, I want to hang on to it. So I create, libraries for my colors. And then what was the first part? Hmm.
Let's see here. Well, maintaining libraries. Do you ever go straight to the computer and
Ah, yes, yes,
not
okay.
sketch?
Yeah, I do sometimes. It all depends. Like, the computer is easiest to me for getting color down and quickly. So sometimes if the color is more what I'm after, the arrangement of colors, then I'll go straight to the computer. Then when I want to figure out some line work or something like that, then I'll go get my pencil out. So it doesn't necessarily go in this, perfect pencil sketch and then it evolves from there. It's sometimes the pencil sketch comes in later because it works for my hand line work or for adding hand touches. So
Gotcha. What about plugins? I mean, have you ever used DrawScribe? I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
no, I mean I hear about plugins, but I just don't use any. The only plugin I ever used was I think it had something to do with transparency before transparency came around in Illustrator, but I don't.
Okay, and actually, so it's great. There's all these great segues, right, from one question to another. So Ed's asking, if you ever use the gradient tool to achieve kind of similar shading effects than what you were just showing with the Pathfinder.
Well, sure, yeah, and I wish I had an example up here because I'm doing some of that more now, more gradient stuff. Like the only thing that I have that I can readily get to, and this isn't a great example, is the background of this sketch has some gradients, just to make the background look good. But yeah, I use gradients for shading things as well. I use feather for getting the edges of certain shapes to look like a shadow that isn't hard. So yeah, I employ all that stuff.
Okay. Mike asked a great question, and that was, he's a traditional illustrator, traditional cartoonist, so we can all appreciate with drawing and pencil and paper and such. Can you comment on the aha moment where you just felt, I just need to make this transition from traditional to digital?
Well, actually, it was a client, and I have to say, like all throughout my career, I kind of have this. a motto that if somebody asks me to do something that, particularly if it involves getting into new technology, then I will take them up on it. And it's never steered me wrong. So it was a client. I was living in New York. They wanted me to email stuff to them, and instead of running to the FedEx box, and I was cutting amberlith, and I was using X-Acto knives to make some of the same shapes that I'm making now. So I was really hanging on to the old stuff, but I had this job and I wanted to keep this client, so I did it. And I did the same thing, when Flash came around and I started doing animation. And that came out of a job. The teaching actually is kind of the same thing. When Renee came to me, because we knew each other through professional circles in Atlanta, but she knew I knew Illustrator, and she needed an Illustrator teacher. So I jumped on board with that. So I think that it's great to have a client motivating you and a deadline and all that, but there's just no doubt that it's good to move in this direction for some things. It doesn't mean that you have to do it for everything, but just
Sure.
being able to, scan your images and know how to work with the color, you have so much more control.
Yeah, I can totally appreciate that, I was talking to another gentleman earlier while you were presenting, just about finding that happy medium. We're not just
Hmm.
digital artists. We work with whatever tools we have available, and whatever the look that we're going after. So whether it be a hand-drawn sketch, traditionally or digitally, it's obviously what the client's looking for.
Yeah.
I tell you, there was just so many great questions here, and we are running close to wrapping up. But you have a very nice, organic, a very loose style. Do you ever work in a style kind of a little bit outside your comfort zone? I mean, do you do any really tight, precise work?
Yeah, I used to do a lot of that because it was part of what I learned in school and part of what I was just sort of, knew. And I always think I'll go back to doing that maybe for my own uh, personal work, but yeah, this is kind of what makes me happy right now. So I sort of stick to this.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is more of a technical question or more of an illustrator question, but you've got a handful of brushes in your brush panel right now. Some of them look like banners and such. Let me just make sure I've got the right question that Alex was asking here. Curious to know what the brushes are in her palette that look like. Okay, so he's wondering why there's a little banner to the right of some of the
Yeah.
brushes in your panel. What
That's an
what does that
art
mean?
brush. Yeah, so this is in the list view, this is how, and that's an option you can choose. In the list view, the symbol for calligraphic brush is up here, this swooshy shape. The banner is an art brush, and then filbert, this is a bristle brush, and then there's a pattern brush. So there's like 5 different kinds of brushes in Illustrator, and that just identifies those.
Gotcha. Okay,
So
and
there it is. There's the chalk scribble art brush.
gotcha. Let me throw an apology out to Alex. I thought Alex was a boy. He's a girl. I mean, she's a girl. That's okay. Sorry about that, Alex. Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch a couple questions around here. So there was a lot of tablet questions that came in throughout. You mentioned that you're using an Intuos tablet. What size tablet are you using, and have you ever experimented with the other size tablets?
I'm using a medium Intuos 5 now, and the last tablet I had was a medium Intuos 4, and the tablet before that was a medium Intuos 2. So I've never used anything bigger than the medium size, and it just like I don't know what I would do with something bigger because I like the sort of size of my setup. I have a Bamboo, which is a small tablet, and I use that for traveling with my laptop, and it's great. It's great too, but the medium's my favorite.
Okay, and along those same lines, you're using obviously Intuos tablets primarily over the years. Do you change any of your pen nibs, and or do you stick with a certain kind? And when do they wear out? What's your feeling on that?
Yes, yes. Like right now, I have an art pen and it has these chisel nibs on it. And even though right now I'm not using the function of the rotation of the art nib or the art pen, I just like that chisel nib, and it feels like felty, and it feels good up against the tablet. I just gravitate more towards the warmer feeling nibs than the plasticky ones that glide a little faster. So I just like the drag. And I've bought nibs over the years, but I don't feel like I have to replace them very often. Oh, I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me?
I can hear
How
you,
about
Joe.
me? Can you hear me? Oh, well, we appear to have lost Wes, but the timing is good. However, there's one great question that I know you've, I think, briefly covered it, but does Illustrator support tilt, and do you use it?
Yes, Illustrator supports tilt and bearing, and if you use it with the bristle brush, you can actually see it because the bristle brush has a brush preview. I have played with it and I use it sometimes, and I've made a couple of brushes that work really do interesting things and make sort of a ribbony uh, and I'm not always exactly sure why. So I do use those two certain times, but it's harder in Illustrator because most of the brushes don't have a dynamic preview, so you can't tell where it's actually pointing. If you use it with the bristle brush, you'll see exactly what I mean. It has a dynamic brush preview, and in that case, it's great because you can see exactly what's going on.
All right, fantastic. Well, I dropped out for a second there.
Welcome back.
Well, thank you, thank you. Anyways, well, we're kind of reaching the end of our questions right there. I don't know if we had any more while I stepped away, but if we haven't gotten to any of the, if there have been any additional questions that came in, we'll try to get responses out to you guys after the fact. But I did want to thank you very much for joining us, Laura. I mean, the virtual round of applause that we're getting is just spectacular. So,
Oh, thank
one of
you.
the one of the questions that came in that I will answer for you, and then you can add to it, was where can we find these tutorials that you were talking about?
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm bringing back up my slide here. So at the top, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/coilart, that's where all the free tutorials live, and some of them are excerpts from my classes. And then underneath here where it says reneepearson.com, that is where the classes live, where you can purchase them. And when you take a class, you have immediate access to it, and it's at your own pace. So there's no specific time you have to show up. And we have a forum there, which is one of my favorite things, where everybody sort of congregates and talks about Illustrator and talks shop. So that's a fun part of taking these classes. And then at the very bottom, that's my blog, where I have Illustrator tips and other stuff on there related to Illustrator.
Again, I simply wanted to thank you very much, Laura, for joining us today. I know that I learned a lot, and I know that from the questions and the responses that we got while you were making your presentation that everybody else did as well.
Great. Oh, well, it's been so nice to be here and talking with all of you, and so thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today.
All right, Laura. Well, thanks again, folks. I appreciate everybody joining us. Take a look at your email. We're going to get this recording cleaned up and posted just in a couple of days. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you at another Wacom webinar.